fellow who already had six single spindle machines. A fellow who already had six single spindle machines would look down on his noise at my gleaming 30-pound metal mushroom and tell me that he couldn't see putting all his strings on the mixer. If it burned out, he would be out of business. If he burned out, he would be out of business until it could be repaired. With six individual machines, on the other hand, chances of all of them burning out at once were slim. And even with 3 or 5 of them out of commission, he would still be able to make a mark. That point of view was a mighty tough one to change. I butted heads with a lot of fleety operators. Some of them I was able to convince. Others never saw the light. But there was enough evidence of interest to maintain my faith in the product. I believed it would be successful. I was a one-man marching band. I'm a one-man marching band. I had a tiny office in the LaSalle Walk building in Chicago. But I was seldom there. My secretary ran the office while I traveled all over the country. Sales were not bad, considering the newness of the product. I could feel it beginning to catch on. But I was extremely unhappy with my financial setup. As a 60-person partner, Janitor Cup was able to restrict my salary, and John Clark kept it at the same time level I'd been at when I left the Lindy Julie Cup. I determined after a little over 2 years that I was going to have to get that 60% back somehow. So I went to Clark and broached it to him. It was then I learned how he'd misled me. The Cool brothers had given up their interest to him. They probably never cared about multi-mixer, and he was going to take this crowd of flashes from my heart. I was boiling mad, but there was not a damn thing I could do about it. I think this machine you are selling has a beautiful future, Ray, he said. I was willing to discount the present to allow you to realize that future. But if you insist on getting my share back, then I must tell you that I want handsome return on my capital investment. Never mind that I hadn't wanted his damn cash in the first place. Either Ed or Prince. Alright, I said. I don't know how he kept from choking on his own eye as he mouthed the figure. $68,000. That's all I remember of our conversation. I'm sure I said something, but I was so benumbed by his outrageous demand that I couldn't think straight. To add taxi to the irony, he wanted the whole thing cash. Of course, I didn't have that kind of money. So what he worked out was the culmination of devilish deal he had tied me to. I had to agree to pay him $12,000 cash. The balance was to be paid off over 5 years. Balance was to be paid off over 5 years plus interest. My salary had to remain at the same level and my expenses in the same range. So in fact, what I was doing was paying him the profits of my company. I didn't know where in the heck I was going to raise the money, but I had made up my mind to do this. In the end, most of the cash came from my new home in Ellington Park. I managed to get an increase in the mortgage, much to Adele's dismay. Her apprehensions about my becoming Mr. Multi-Mixer had been laid to rest at this point, and I don't think she ever got over the shock of discovering that we were nearly $100,000 in debt. She couldn't seem to handle it. For me, this was the first phase of grinding it out, building my personal monument to capitalism. I paid tribute in the further sense. For many years before I was able to raise the McDonald's with the foundation I had laid. Perhaps without that adversity, I might not have been able to preserve later on when my financial burdens were redoubled. I learned then how to keep problems from crushing me. I refused to worry about more than one thing at a time. And I would not let useless thinking about a problem, no matter how important, keep me from sleeping. This is easier said than done. I did it through my overbrand of self-hypnosis. I may have read a book on the subject. I don't remember, but in any case, I worked out a system that allowed me to turn off nervous tensions and shut out nagging questions when I went to bed. I knew that if I hadn't, I wouldn't be bright and fresh and be able to deal with customers in the morning. I would think of my mind as being a blackboard full of messages. I would think of my mind as being a blackboard full of messages, most of them urgent, and I practiced imagining a hand with an eraser, wiping that blackboard clean. I practiced imagining a hand with an eraser wiping that blackboard clean. I made my mind completely blank. If a thought began to appear, I would wipe it out before it could form. Then I would relax my body. beginning at the back of my neck and continuing on down, shoulders, arms, torso, legs, to the tips of my toes. By this time, I would be asleep. I learned to do this procedure rather than rapidly. Others marveled that I could work 12 or 13 hours a day at a busy convention, then entertain potential customers until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and still be out of bed early, ready to color my next client. My secret was in getting the most out of every minute of rest. I guess I couldn't have averaged more than 6 hours of sleep a night. Many times I got 4 hours or less, but I slept as hard as I worked. There was a lot of nervous tension at that time on all levels of society over the alarming development in Europe and Asia. There was a lot of nervous tension at the same time. A lot of nervous tension at the same time on all levels of society over the alarming developments in Europe and Asia. Magazines speculated grimly on whether war with Japan was inevitable. Then our attention was diverted from Japanese aggression in China to the Nazi conquest in Europe. On December 7, 1941, we were thrown into war by the Japanese sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, and I was thrown out of multi-mixer business. Supplies of copper used in winding the motors for multi-mixer were restricted by the war effort. A salesman without a product is like a violinist without a bow. So I scratched it around and made a deal with Eric E. Burt to sell a line of low-fat malted milk powder and 16-ounce paper cups for a drink holder, Malta blended. It was mixed in the cup using the metal sleeve or color, just like one in a million. I kept needling Earl Prince to come up with some new ideas for me to sell. But it seemed as though he could think of nothing that wasn't illegal or racial. I managed to make a living in Malta Black. But paying off my debt to John Clark became a real nightmare. I did it though, and when World War II ended, I was able to go back to selling multi-mixers as my own. It was a glorious feeling. Business recovered after the war, and soon it was better than ever. Now soft mix ice cream purveyors were starting up as franchises, and I was in there pushing multi-mixers into this expanding market. To Dairy King, Tasty Trees, and the rest, I sold a multi-mixer to a guy named Willard Marriott, who had just opened a drive-in called A&W Root Beer. His method of operation fascinated me. I considered myself a connoisseur 20th year of teaching. After all, selling multi-mixers took me into thousands of them. I prided myself on being able to tell which operations would appeal to the public, which operations would appeal to the public, which would fail. Willard Marriott looked like a winner to me from the start. I had no more idea than he did back then. So, for what a giant his Marriott operation would become in hotels and restaurants. I was spending a lot of time in bars and in those days too. Not as a customer, but as a critic. The whole mixed drink industry seemed entirely too bland to it needed livening up with new drinks that used ice cream. They would be mixed, of course, on a multi-mixer. My favorite was the blend and creamed malt in the meantime creamed cocktail or Coca-Cola with ice cream. The result was a soft custard that could be both after dinner drink and dessert. I called the thing the Delicato. One place, the Evergreen, a well-known steakhouse in Dundee, Illinois, served the Delicato in a champagne glass to be eaten with a spoon or sipped through a little straw. Obviously, my invention did not alter the nation's drinking habits, but it was an interesting notion. I became a travel in handling multi-mixers hinged around restaurants and dairy association conventions. I hit all of their national shows and larger regional ones as well. I would order a dozen or so multi-mixers to be sent to each show by railway express from our plant in downstate Illinois. When I arrived, I would display some of them in my own booth and set the others on the counter of the big manufacturer soda counters. Liquid carbonate, Bastion Plaza, Grand Rapids Soda Fountain, and others. I never left one of those shows without selling all of my samples, in addition to other orders. That's why I dreaded the last day of any show. I would have to repack the machines for shipment to the purchasers. I'd never been handy with tools, and creating those machines was always an interlude spiced with splinters, skinned knuckles, and plenty of profanity. It was worth the irritation, naturally, but I sometimes wished I'd gotten into selling something I could fit in my pocket. My sample case for the multi-mixer weighed close to 50 pounds. I had wheels installed on the bottom of it so I could pull it down the street like my little red wagon. But it was a hassle to get in and out of taxi cabs or up a long flight of stairs. I didn't bother setting sales goals for multi-mixer. I didn't need any artificial incentives to keep me working at top speed. My estimate of when I was having a good year, and I sold 5,000 units. I have several of those. One year, 1949 or 1948 or 1949, I sold 8,000. That kind of volume was making my style of operating from outside of the office increasingly difficult. I needed more help, but I was reluctant to hire another office worker. It was useless to ask Ethel to come in. She had made that perfectly clear. Yet it didn't seem to me that the business was strong enough to add another hand. Finally, late in the fall of 1949, my accountant, L. Doty, convinced me that I was going to have to hire a bookkeeper. I respected Al's judgment. He had been recommended to me by my friend Al Handy at Harris Trust and Saving Bank. And his firm handled my accounting for many years. Anyhow, Al got me going, and I put an ad in the papers. I can't remember how many girls I interviewed, but I will never forget the brilliant wave who got the job. There was no question in my mind after we talked for a few minutes that this Mrs. June Martino was the one to hire. She was wearing a faded coat that hardly looked adequate for the December storm that was sweeping down the Las Street Canyon that day. And she looked as though she missed several meals, yet she had a presence that conveyed integrity and a restless native ability to deal with problems. This was enveloped in a warm, compassionate personality, a rare combination of traits. The fact that she had no bookkeeping experience bothered me. Not at all. I knew she would master the technical routines quickly, so I told her I couldn't pay much, but if she was willing to work hard anyhow, I could promise her a bright future. She talked the same language. We did work hard, unbelievably hard, and in less than 20 years, she was one of the top women executives in the country, secretary and treasurer of McDonald's Corporation. June came from an improvident German family on the northwest side of Chicago. She and Louis Martino were married shortly after World War II. He was an engineer with Western Electric, and the company wanted to have him exempt from the military draft because he was working on a coaxial cable invention that could be vital to defense communication. One day, June took some papers down to the Army Personnel Office that was processing race classification. When she left, she had been exempt from the service, but she had been sworn in. She was very patriotic and just got carried away As a WAC, she studied electronics at Northwestern University and learned trigonometry and calculus and God knows what else. She had to do it by intensive tutoring because she had no special aptitude for higher mathematics. But that's the sort of person she was. No challenge was too big for her. If she didn't know something, she borrowed into library books and find it. Louis was married shortly before World War II. He was engineer, Western Electric, and the company wanted to have him exempt from the company. Exempt.